Welcome to Felony Friday, a presentation of the Lions of Liberty podcast. Here is your host, John Odermatt.
Felons, friends, and freedom lovers, it's so great to have you back here with me for another edition of Felony Friday, right here on the Lions of Liberty podcast. Of course, the Lions of Liberty podcast is the show where we strive each and every week to expose injustice in the broken criminal justice system. This is the last Felony Friday episode of 2016, the last Lions of Liberty podcast episode of 2016. And I hope everyone out there has had a relaxing and enjoyable holiday season. As you can hear by the sound of my voice, I'm getting over a little bit of a cold, so I'll power through this introduction as quick as I can. 2016 has been a great year for the Lions of Liberty, but I'm pretty confident that 2017 is going to be even better. And next week, actually on Monday, which is going to be the first Monday of 2017, myself and Mark Clare and Brian McWilliams will be laying out some of the exciting changes that are going to be coming in 2017 to the podcast, to the Lions of Liberty podcast. Hopefully, these changes are going to set us up to be able to engage better with our audience and ultimately to reach a wider audience and grow this show to reach more ears. That is the goal, to take the message of liberty to a wider audience after all. Now, today's episode of Felony Friday is part 2 of my interview with Shane Casey. In part 1 last week, Shane shared the background information on how he came to be charged with absolutely horrendous crimes of sexual abuse of a child. These crimes are really brought against him without any real physical or circumstantial evidence whatsoever. And in part 2 of today's episode, he's going to be going into and actually going through each trial. Shane did have 3 different trials and ultimately let us know how he ended up getting released and how he got out on a plea agreement while being able to continue to maintain his innocence and not having to file in the sex offender registry. This episode is a bit longer, so with that in mind, I do want to get to the interview. So just one more note before I get started. This is episode number 52 of Felony Friday. So that means you can find links and notes for the stuff that we're going to talk about in this episode at lionsofliberty.com/ff52. This episode is brought to you by igniteliberty.us. So please check out the Make Liberty Great Again gear that they have there, hats and shirts. All hats are at $19.95, and you can get free shipping on your order of any size, by entering discount code HOLIDAY. Okay, here is part 2 of my interview with Shane Casey. So Shane, this is all going on. You're being interviewed. Detectives they search your stuff. They find this book. At what point are you arrested?
Right. So it was on January 4th, 2008. I was arrested by Detective Lance Byrne when he called me to tell me that I had to come pick up my son, Aaron Shane Casey, the son that I had with Stacy Parnisky, because she had been taken into custody on a probation violation, which she was currently on because of altercation with her mother. So I felt something was wrong, but of course, I'm not going to not go pick up my son. And so I have to give him the benefit of the doubt because I would never not go pick up my son. As soon as I got there, he said I was under arrest for aggravated sexual assault on a minor. And I was just beside myself. I'm like, I couldn't believe it was true. It was just so surreal. And the next thing I know, I'm thrown into jail. I'd never been in jail for more than maybe when I was younger. I had alcohol. I think it was intoxication. So I kept him in there for a few hours, but that was about it. And they threw me in jail. And then they put me into the hole for the first time, which I'm sure you've heard about the hole. And the next thing you know, I wake up in there and my whole life was just ripped from me. And from there, I ended up trying to find out everything I could about my case, John, and I fought. And to give you some highlights, just because honestly, 3 trials and 7 years, 7 months, 5 days would be kind of hard to cram into, even if it was 2 sessions and not 1.
Right.
But I think that touching on the points, especially about our system, is important, and what changes, what had happened to me a little bit, if it helped to make some changes. But also, I would like to touch based on what I told you about the allocution and what personally happened to me through my wrongful conviction. Because today I could sit here and tell you, John, that it was horrible and all that, but in the end, I'm a better man for it, because it really takes, it puts you to the test ultimately when you're put in a situation like that, and it can either make you or break you. And I ended up having a strong belief and faith in Christianity, and I got into practicing it really strongly, and to this day I still believe. Just to go on a little bit about what happened with that. So I'm thrown into jail, and then I get this attorney. That attorney goes, and I'm saying, what's going on? And I didn't know anything. And finally, I end up, it was an older inmate in there, said, you know what? If you really are innocent, then you should be in that law library every day studying law. You should be writing everybody, getting anybody you can to help. And I'm really grateful for that inmate to this day, because I did exactly what he said. And I started studying law and learning more than I ever cared to know about our system. And then I started going into waiting for my first trial.
At what point, was it real? Did it sink into you that it was a real possibility that you were going to be convicted of this?
I never believed it. It wasn't until my second trial, obviously, but I didn't believe it. There's no way. So as things start to unfold, I get my attorney, Dan McGuire, and I start getting evidence, of course, because I learned that you ask for full discovery. And so I started asking for everything. And I'm reading through this evidence, and one of the pieces that, to this day, like, haunt me, and how people can be so swayed by emotion versus logic, common sense. Anyway, I get the evidence. I find that shocked me was a medical report that was given to me from Santa Clara Valley Medical Center or something for kids. They do the testing there for children that have been allegedly sexually abused. I got the report thinking, I'm going to see all these things that were awful. And it turned out that after this full exam, using all the, latest technology, that there was absolutely no evidence of any type of trauma whatsoever, is what they said. And fact that she was a perfectly healthy child.
So the police had lied to you when they were first beginning to investigate you, telling you that there was physical evidence?
Yes. And of course they can lie because it's part of their ruse, and they have the legal right to lie to get the truth. It's kind of I don't know. Yeah. What do I want to say? Oxymoron? I was trying to think of the word. That was the first big shocker to me. And then another one was I got another report. It was a medical report, and this is what just really floored me, John. So when Stacy sent her daughter to California to her father's when she was going into treatment, in the auspices, getting her back when she was, done, he had brought her to a doctor right away for like a physical or a checkup. And the doctor did a full examination. I can't remember his name, but I have the report still. Did examination on her and said that she was in 25 percentile weight, this and that. Anyway, the end was that she was a perfectly healthy 10-year-old young girl. And when this all came out, somehow the report that was said to, about that doctor's report was never brought up to the people that were doing the exams for the police about the sexual abuse, but was actually the people that were doing the exam was told by her father, David, that he brought her to the doctor when she got there, that she was about 15 pounds underweight, emaciated, she had sores everywhere, and she was very unhealthy. And that was never the truth. In fact, the report actually showed from the exam that when he brought her for the trauma exam, that she had actually gained weight, and just the exact opposite of what he said. And that was a big piece in my case in the first trial. And in the second, that was a big one, by a pediatrician by the name of Dr. Joseph Hagan. I know he's done a lot of good for children in our state, but he clearly, this is our system here, and this is a part that I want to talk about that, is disturbing. So they have their expert, this doctor, the prosecution, and he's looking through the report in my first trial about her being underweight, and so basically he was saying that his opinion would be that she has classic failure to thrive, a child underweight, not doing good in school and all this. And he was basing his opinion on that in my first trial. And the other piece of evidence had not come in to my first trial that I remember, because I remember being in the second. So anyway, at the end of the trial, John, luckily, and I believe there was a greater power working for me. I had a hung jury, and because some people just weren't going to believe the story, it was just too far fetched. All these men, this happening.
Yeah, just to get to the daughter's story for a minute, because I don't think you really got into the details of it. She was accusing more than just you, that her mom was allowing hundreds of anonymous men that were never charged with anything
Yes,
to sexually abuse her, correct?
absolutely. And this is the thing that to this day, and if I could ask T.J. Donovan and a lot of other people, he's now what is he, Attorney General now? Our former state prosecutor, T.J. Donovan,
Okay.
in my area. One of the questions I would love for him to answer, and he refuses to, is where are all the other men, TJ? So let's touch on that just for a second, because it's really a powerful part of my case. So allegedly, her daughter had claimed when this is all, the story was constantly changing too, John. So, first it was only me, but then it was not just me, it was these other people, but then it was just me in the end. And so it kept changing. And then these other people also in England came out, former boyfriends of Stacy Parnitsky. And so anyway, so this story ends up coming out that this happened in England first when she was very young. It was 5 years old when it first happened. And the story that she said happened was that 5 men a week from an AA meeting in England would come to the flat there, I think they call it, and they would put on this movie, and it was supposed to be a Disney movie, but it was really a pornographic movie. And then they would end up doing things to her mother and sticking her with needles. Now, she's clearly said with needles like you get at the doctor. She would see it going in. And then they would come, some of them, and do the same to her, stick her with these needles, and she'd feel the effect of it, and they would do the same to her. And that every time, that they did it, they did actually full penetration, and it was horrible, some of the things that she was saying. So this was happening every week, like once a week on a Friday in England for years. And this is way before, I was ever in the picture. So then they moved to Vermont from England, her mom and her. And that was in 2000, was it 4 or 5? Because they were before I had met them. And everything was fine. But somehow, John, they were living with her grandmother, Stacy's mother, for a little while. And they had their own place. And somehow the same exact story, once they had gotten into that apartment that was happening in England, started happening here. 5 men a week from an AA meeting down the street from the apartment would come to the apartment and do exactly the same thing to her, watch the exact same movie that was in England, and just do the exact same thing. And this went on for years again. And then I was the last one, of course, in this sex ring of this child. And the sad part about that one is my name was never mentioned until actually her father at the very end said, "Oh, and was Shane doing this too?" And she said, "Oh yeah, Shane was doing this too." So this is really an interesting piece about the A meeting down the street. So here you have the exact same stories. And, Detective Lance Burnham, who was the lead detective on this case, knew about this A meeting that was down the street and also the apartment building, which is right, close to it. But for some reason, never went and investigated and talked to anybody at that meeting because it's an anonymous meeting. So I guess if you're an alleged pedophile, you can just go to an AA meeting and everything's going to be okay and you'll be safe. I guess I don't know, John, about that one, and also he never talked to anybody at the apartment building where Stacy lived to see if they saw like 5 men every Friday night coming up there. I imagine somebody would have seen something. He said the building was locked, so he couldn't get in. And he may have talked to one neighbor. Now, this is a lead detective on a case, on a huge case, allegedly, of this child being raped for years. So I was baffled by that myself, and many others are. But the crazy thing is that I actually ended up, when I was in prison, meeting some people from that AA meeting right down the street. And one of them, his name's Kevin Kerwin, he said I could speak openly, was an avid member of that meeting that allegedly these men were coming from. And he said there was no way in hell that any men from that meeting would do such a thing from a child. And he knew them personally, 10-year member, and he would gladly testify in court. And he never was used, of course. And he actually saw my wife, my former wife there, Stacy, at the meeting a couple of times in the back, just sitting quiet. So anyway, here's the story of this all happening all these times. And at the end of it all, There was no shreds of evidence of any type of trauma, John. They did forensic testing on her for the drugs. They did hair samples. Nothing was ever found. No needle marks. I'm sure right when she went out to her dad's, if she was checked by the doctor, he would have noticed something. There was never anything. And the irony is, like, with the hair samples they did for the drug testing, she never got her hair cut. And her dad said, even admitted that, yeah, he let her grow it out long. So, with hair, if you don't cut it, it stays in there forever. So there would have been something with all these drugs that were being given like every week, and there was nothing. They never found anything at all to corroborate the story whatsoever. So I'm thinking to myself, I'm getting all this evidence and learning this. I'm saying, there's no way a jury is going to find me guilty, like in the first trial where I had the hung jury. I wouldn't believe it, and we could believe it. But I obviously learned I was sadly mistaken later on. But there was one comforting piece that I just share about the first trial I'll never forget. And that was a man in my jury, pretty much sitting like right eye contact from me across. And he looked at me and he said, "I don't believe it." And he mouthed it really slow. And I had a real comforting thought that I was going to be okay. And obviously I had a hung jury. So here I am after that. I'm getting all this evidence in. I'm going, what's going on? Nothing's happened to this child. How could they make up these stories? And I'm sure you know, but unless you go through a trial or you study them, you don't realize that they're a whole animal of their own. It's a stage, it's actors, and at the end of the day, it's not really so much the truth that matters, but who wins, and sometimes at any cost. So here I am. I get this hung jury after being in prison now. Let's see, it was 2008. My first trial was 2009, June, around there, April, June. So I thought I was going to be getting out or whatever, and oh no, we're going to try you again. And I just was like, then I didn't even know what to say, John. I was just beside myself. The next thing you know, I'm sitting in there, and the trial is going to happen, and we go through all these process to pick our jury. And the day before the trial was supposed to start, my wife's attorney's mother had passed away, so it was canceled, and I spent more time in jail. The next jury that was picked was a jury that had sit on a panel for 3 other trials, roughly, because that's how it is in the state of Vermont. You can do many trials in your period. And they had guilty verdicts on all of them. And one of them was a sex offender, a second-time sex offender who had a prior charge in Florida and had been caught with physical evidence of drugging his daughter's friend and then fondling her. And there was physical evidence. There was drugs in her system, and the girl caught her. So anyway, in my second trial, this is why I want to mention like the corruption a little bit here. During my jury voir dire, the questionnaires, somehow inadvertently, as the judge had put it then, and his name was Robert Colibus, this other person, his questions got mixed in with mine, John. And these people were looking at me right off as this person that had already done this horrible thing, and a monster, and they were like all thinking I was guilty. And the judge just gave them a curative instruction saying, well, you're not to confuse Mr. Casey with Mr. Colibus, and you just to disregard that, and so that was just like one of the many things like in that second trial that was not right. Another one was there was evidence that there was needles found when there wasn't. I almost had to kick my attorney to question the lead detective, Lance Byrne, because he said there was needles and spoons. There was never anything found. He tried to say that I admitted I was guilty. This is another, I just want to bring up this for the manipulation that can be used in our wonderful art of argument, right? When I was read my Miranda rights, I said, yup, something like that. I was just so I didn't even care what he was saying to me. And on the stand, he tried to use that as me giving an admission of guilt over and over again, and clearly knowing that it was me just answering the questions to the Miranda rights. And he also had said that there were some other things found that later on he had to take back that were not found, and had to apologize or something like that. So this just went on. And, right to the, in my second trial, the Dr. Hagen that they had in my first trial, he was actually handed the initial medical report from the doctor when she was brought out there about being underweight. And now I just want to bring this up because it's important. He was basing his whole theory on classic failure to thrive because of the underweight, malnutrition, all that. And he was showing this report about her being healthy. And he said, "Oh, was weight ever an issue in this case?" And he didn't recall that. And but he still stuck by what he had said. So, I mean, this just went on and on through there's such bizarre incidents in all three trials. Of course, the third one was a whole nother. I don't know if you know anything about any of my trials at all, or if Mark had talked to you about any of them at all.
Just what I read in the article.
Okay.
So, yeah,
okay. Sure.
You can fill in the third trial.
Sure.
For sure.
So basically, I didn't have a prayer's chance in hell in my second trial. It was clearly a hangman's jury. Everybody felt it that came to say, like, sit in my trial a day or two, because they already had guilty verdicts on these other well-convicted sex offender. And of course, they had already mixed the, my jury instructions, which was huge. They already planted this in their mind that I was guilty. And, many of us know that have been in the system that you're not innocent until proven guilty. You're guilty until you hope you're proven innocent.
Mm-hmm.
And that's if your attorney is willing to do a good enough job for you, especially if you're poor and can't afford to spend hundreds of thousands. In my case, I can't imagine, probably millions at 3 trials. So you're going to be stuck with what you get, and hopefully you'll have enough fortitude to learn law yourself and correct your lawyer when he's not doing his job, which happens. So anyway, so I go through this trial, John, and I'm found guilty at the end of it. And I just couldn't believe it. So I was just going through the motions of waiting for, the sentencing to come and the appeal. And the next thing you know, the judge had thrown out the verdict because of tainted evidence.
What was the tainted evidence?
The doctor that they had in the first trial vouched for the credibility of the alleged victim in the second trial, even after, like, you being shown the reports, like I said, and shown that he was mistaken. But he actually vouched and said that it was a classic failure to thrive, and that this child was abused, and he overstepped his boundaries. And his you can't do that. You can give your expert opinion, but you cannot say that So that was no good, and it was thrown out based on that, and prosecutorial misconduct in that too, because they let him go through the entire case again and basically just say that all the points that they were touching on was correct and that she was abused, and this is why. So it was no good. He threw it out, and I was granted a third trial, which I just was, I couldn't believe it. Here I am now. I went in 2008. I had been a caregiver my whole life, John. I struggled a little bit with addiction, and it was later found out that when I was diagnosed with MS, that I had struggled with cocaine addiction, because I was introduced when I was in my later teens, and I had real bad fatigue, and it helped. And later I find out that fatigue all those years was multiple sclerosis. So anyway, I'm always open about the truth, because there's nothing to hide. Being in human services and care, I have my flaws, I have my struggles, but I loved what I do, and I love helping others. And in all my years, in all my places I've worked, I've always gotten great write-ups of being, one of the best caregivers there is, right up to the place before I went to jail, about how wonderful I did for the children, and that was through the Francis Foundation. So there's no inkling of any of this ever being, true in my character or whatever. So all these years, and I'm sitting here, like, here I am, my third trial, been in since 2008, and I lost faith in the system itself, the justice system, because I saw them, like, they can take something and manipulate it to look like something else that doesn't even exist. And it's baffling until you're there. And you're in the middle of it, and you're thinking, there's no way this is ever going to happen to me. And to be honest with you, my story is like, this could happen to you. Don't think that it couldn't, and I've told people that many times. And
I think a lot of people like yourself, probably before this experience, have a view of the criminal justice system that it's, solely there to protect us. It's to, lock bad people away. And unfortunately, you obviously here found out the hard way that far too often it's not there to protect. It's there for, to serve an agenda of a prosecutor to just get a conviction.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, that's what they're looking for, a conviction.
Yes.
And it's unfortunate.
It's very unfortunate, and many people don't know or understand that our system is built on a system of plea deals, and that if everybody stood up, the truly innocent, even those that were guilty, I mean, if we all said we're going to trial, our system would crash. So they're dependent on that.
So you were talking about, not to interrupt you there, but what was the conclusion of the third trial?
Yeah. So, I have it documented, and I wish, I made some notes that I was going to bring up, but, I just wanted to speak from the heart really tonight. But there was always something going on in the trials that was not right. And it was just said, well, curative instruction will be given, and, or just to disregard that, like the mentioning of, as human beings, you cannot tell, I don't care if you're sitting in a jury or not, and you're following the judge's instructions, but you cannot plant something in the head like needles were found when they weren't, or evidence that was there doesn't exist, or and think that that's not going to stay in the minds of people and sway them by their decision, because we base things on emotion, whether we like it or not. When it comes to children, especially
with evidence like that
Yes.
is like needles, something that's a visual. You say that immediately.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone's seen a needle on TV or something like that, and it's associated with drugs. So something like that, it's a very, it causes a reaction. And even if, like you're saying, later they walk it back and say, oh, forget about that.
Absolutely.
That's not real. That didn't happen.
Absolutely. Like there was a piece of evidence also in the trials, I should mention, a white couch. This was a big piece of evidence here. This white couch, all these incidents had happened in the apartment where Stacy had lived with her daughter before moving in with me, and then we had the white couch there. Well, this couch was allegedly, all these acts were taking place, but yet when they went to do DNA, like that's why I'm so stuck with my case, right? No DNA evidence. They didn't find any DNA evidence of mine, and other than my epithelial skin cells, which we leave everywhere we go. But this is the thing, like the attorney, even when you feel like your attorney's on your side, or you're told that you're going to be defended, that's not so true. Unfortunately, my attorney was not going to even mention things like that, and I had to like really kick him under the table to say, because they had mentioned DNA was found. I said to say specifically what it was, and to come find out that there was like seminal fluids found on this couch, but they weren't part of the case, and all this other stuff that was just thrown out. And there was never anything found on the couch, no blood, no nothing. So, I mean, they can just take anything and try to build this case on it by getting their strategy set and sticking to it. And so I'm wrapped up in this. I'm fine. Here comes, my third trial, and I'm like, okay, so what's going to be the foul up in this one? Because every trial had something. I had storms through my trial canceling it, and volcanic ash stopping experts coming over from England, and it just went on and on. And so here's the third trial, and we're going through, and we get to the place where Stacy's daughter takes the stand for the third time now, and mind you, John, her story changed every time. She ends up saying the same thing, and my former ex-wife, she said, I can't do this. So I guess if the kid says we did it, I guess we did it, because everyone's going to believe the kid. And this was during lunchtime after her testifying, and the next thing I know, my lawyer comes down. It's lunchtime, and he says, your wife just took a deal, and she's being they're going to ship her back to England, deport her back to England, to her home country, free. Going to be off paper, no troubles, and free. So I was just sitting there dumbfounded, John. 3 trials, and standing, firm in the truth and never wavering on it. And I was thrown offers. I think my first one was 10 to 50 by my attorney in my first trial. And I kind of laughed, and I said, why don't you just tell him 20 to 100? I said, I'll never take any deal. I'll die in prison before I'll ever take a deal, or ever say that I did something horrible like that to a child.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, it comes to this point, and she ends up getting deported back to England, and I stuck it out to the end. And during that time, I was offered another like 5 to 15. I could get out of jail and all that, and be on the sex offender registry for this period of time. And I said, I will never take anything of a sex offender or anything, because I'm innocent and I will stay in jail and die until I am exonerated or the truth, So I always stuck by that because I knew that was one of the very important and truths to stick by the truth and never waver. And that's what really saved my life through all the years and trials. And as I had faith, I always had faith, John, too. That was a big part.
Unfortunately, we're running low on time here, so I just want to get to the highlights here. Maybe we can have you back on to add to it. So just there's one question I want to ask about the trial, about Stacey taking the deal. So Stacey all of a sudden is not there. She's taking a plea deal. What did they say? What did the judge say during the trial when that happened, when all of a sudden one of the co-defendants is gone?
Right, absolutely. And that was another big part of it. They're not to worry about why Mrs. Parnitsky is no longer here, that they're just to go by me being left there, that she's no longer, part of the case, and that don't be concerned about it, basically. And, basically told them that, if they were to have wonder or to just disregard that, basically, is what the judge was telling them. So, the trial goes on, and, and mind you that my attorney is not really prepared to go on further because he was relying a lot on my wife's attorney, who was doing a lot of the research and, bringing out the exhibits. And so he's left with me, and he starts cutting some of my witnesses, expert witnesses. One was a gynecologist that was expert, who was great, and he didn't use him. And so anyway, so I go through the rest of my trial, right to the end, and it's I'm going through deliberations in my third trial, and evidence is closed. And one of the this is where I actually my own attorney, and to this day I believe it and to be true, actually got me to be found guilty, and I'll tell you why. So evidence is closed, and the jury sends out, they can send out notes to ask for things. And one of the notes was about reviewing the transcripts, the trial transcripts, and they were already in evidence, I guess. And then one of them asked in an open court, which you're not supposed to do, to the judge in front of everybody, could we review the forensic interview of the alleged victim, part 1? And the judge said, no, I don't think so. Evidence is closed. You have to go by what you have. And this is also important. My jury, the first one was hung for like 18 hours, and they finally came back, and said they threw it out. It was hung. My third trial, unbeknownst to me, and I found out later that my jury was hung 6-6, and the state had gone to my attorney and told them that if this man gets another hung jury, that we're dropping the charges, he's going to walk free. So I didn't know this at the time. And so anyway, they end up having a little argument, and it turns out that they're going to go ahead and get this first part of this interview of the alleged victim in for the jury to watch, which is about 3.5 hours long. And I was so tired back then and just fatigued that I didn't hear some of what was going on. I asked my attorney, well, didn't they already have the transcripts and evidence? And yes, they're in evidence. And I'm sorry, I was mistaken when I said earlier that they weren't in evidence. He lied to me, and then he told me to just trust him and allow this CD to come in and let them watch it. Well, the problem is when evidence is closed, you can't cross-examine in deliberation. So whatever's in, you can't say anything. And there's 2 parts to this forensic interview, and they're drastically different. And without showing them both and being able to point out that this is what was played, and I remember it burning in my mind to this day. All of a sudden I hear this young child crying and saying all these horrible things. And then my name is being mentioned in this. And this first one, which she later had changed her story because it didn't work, because I wasn't even in the picture then. So it was too far-fetched, so the story changed. And the second interview, that comes out. So anyway, for 3.5 hours, the jury watches this young girl crying, and they go back out to deliberate and come back. I can't remember if it was like 45 an hour with a guilty verdict. And from there, I waited for a sentencing, and next thing you know, I went in and was sentenced to 20 to life, 2 counts, running concurrent. And
Wow.
This is So just quickly on that piece of evidence, this is so important, John, and especially my attorney, knew that piece of evidence. It was clearly when I had everything went down. I lost my direct appeal, and we went through my PCR, and here I am free today. it came out that piece of evidence, that my attorney should never let it in, and it was the worst error ever seen. And that's why I'm here, because the state got scared and knew if I went through all my PCR all the way, that I'd most likely win. And I had my own defense attorneys tell me we'd never say this against one of our own, but I think we have a pretty powerful malpractice suit against him for professional negligence. And and honestly, if I had stuck it out, I probably would, someday maybe be a millionaire or well off anyway. So through that time, I couldn't believe it. And I got actual evidence of a mock jury trial where this mock juries, they're showing this evidence of these pictures that are black and white in color. And I'll tell you why it's so significant. And they're showing these pictures of something that's not even real, but they were convinced by these that the person was guilty, and because it was implanted in their mind. And it talks about videos like that. So the last thing that jury saw, and they were 6 to hung, women as well, which is, harder to convince that it's not true. They were hung and they saw this child crying for 3.5 hours. So what are they going to do? For the benefit of the fact that, and many people know this, for the one guilty, 10 innocent can also be put away, just because they would not want to take the chance that they let some, pedophile free. And and to this day, no one will convince me that my attorney did not throw me under the bus that day and help me to be found guilty. So, but there was a part that I'd love to share it with you. I know that we're running out of time, but this is the most important. Yeah.
You wanted to share what you read, your allocution?
Sure, absolutely, because this is what I did with that time. Instead of allowing it to destroy me and just being considered a convicted sex offender against a child is like the most horrible crime on the planet. And anybody that knows our system, I mean, on the outside, on the inside, you're like the cockroach of the prisoner. And but through it all, I persevered through. And this is what I read to the judge. Now, this was Judge Cooper Smith, who sentenced me to 20 to life, even after saying that the case was, very strange. It should have been separate trials. The evidence did not add up to the story. It was weak. But in the end, the jury believed the story. So, I'm going to believe it too. And you're going to sentence 20 to life. So he sentenced me to 20 to life. I go in front of the same judge who didn't want to know nothing about the legal reasoning behind the state. And my attorney's making it. He just wanted me in his courtroom. He's going to accept my Alford plea, which I'll tell you really quickly about. And this is I'll back up really quickly. Just take me a second. So November, this is important now, of 2015, right? I'm at 2015 now. My attorneys during my PCR show up to the jail where I'm at, and they told me I got some good news. They told me about the success in the witness they had for my PCR, and that the state offered to drop one of my 20 life convictions and max me out on the other 20 to life and put me out on the registry for life. I could be free in 6 years, then 7 years and a day. And, I said, I thank you for coming, and I'll think about it. But I can tell you right now, most likely the answer is no. And I talked to everybody I love. And this is important for those out there too, John, if you ever hear this, or family members or whatever. But I talked to everybody I loved because, I didn't want it to be just my decision, I didn't want to be selfish. And they all wanted me to just come out. They were like, just come out. We know you're not a convicted sex. Just come home and be with us. And, I really, I have faith, and I prayed a lot, John. And at the end of it, I could not accept anything. And I told my attorney, no, I can't accept that. I'd rather die in prison than ever. And I meant it. And so, he came back with a deal, an Alford plea. And I know you've probably heard of that, an Alford plea by now, I'm sure, John. So I could take an Alford plea to an first-degree aggravated domestic assault, have both charges dropped, there could wrongful convictions, and my sentence is vacated, and that I could still have the ability to fight for other people with innocence projects. I try to help with other innocence projects, and I could fight for my pardon later on, and I could keep my innocence even in the courtroom that day. And this is what I read that day to the judge, and I'll read it to you now. And that I could still fight, but and then I could read the court that day off paper, done. I didn't want to do that even, John. It took me a couple of weeks and I broke down crying. And sometimes even to this day, I felt like I've sold out, even though I'm free and I can fight because I didn't do that. And I'm a convicted felon now, wrongfully. But so I read this to the judge, many forms, this is starts out with Sir Winston Churchill as a quote, and you probably have heard it before. Many forms of government have been tried and tested and will be tried in a world of woe. Do you know that quote by Sir Winston Churchill? He talks about democracy being the worst form of government, but better than all the rest.
Yes,
so,
yes.
Yeah. The significance was the judge actually said that in one of my trials, and I repeated that back to him that day when he set me free. And this is what I learned in there, and this is most important of all. When I went into there, I wanted to go on and on about statistics, and I studied law. So I started out with, as I appeared at this court today, I appear not as just one man, but as one of the many men, women who have been wrongfully convicted of a crime we never committed. Justice is what ought to be. Truth is what is. And then I went on to talk about the statistics of the national, you've heard of the innocence database. It's like one of the biggest ones there is. And Justice Denied. I don't know if you've heard of them or not.
Talking about the Innocence Project?
Well, there's an actual database, innocence status database. And it's from, it's generated usually from the Justice Denied website. It's the world's largest database of people.
I'll link to that in the show notes. Justice Denied for sure.
Yeah. So I went in there, I was doing all these, and I started out my allocution with that, and I went through talking about statistics on the cases of being wrongfully convicted and us being the worst U.S. of all other countries, and the fact that we take longer to get people that have been wrongfully convicted out. And I went on about it. And back then, for my type of cases, which can be the worst, 475 people had been exonerated in the U.S., and this was back in, I think it was since 1998, of a sexual assault-related crime, and they were incarcerated for an average of 11 years. So I beat the odds, John, that I'm out, and I'm not a convicted sex offender on top of that. And, I imagined back then that cases were going to grow, and I went through, and cases have just grown in numbers, and I just pointed out all of this, and I was going through this. But in the end, I stopped because it wasn't really about that was the importance of me being there that day. It was really about sharing about the people that supported me through all those years that I never could have made it through, and the ones that had taught me lessons on how to be a man and to endure suffering, and which I learned about being thrown in the hole and the persecution, the horror stories I could tell you on and on, which are just numerous. But in the end, what I learned was that it's important to stick to the truth, have faith, be strong, and believe whatever you believe and be willing to fight for it and die for it. And I did that. And that's what I learned. I learned that suffering can be a tool used to not make you bitter or resentful, but to actually help you grow and become enlightened. And when you endure suffering and come to the other side, you can take that as a great tool. And so I went on in jail, and I just wanted to help others. And so I read this whole allocution. There's just one really a part of it that I'll read to you right now, and then I'll tell you what I said at the very end of my allocution, which many were shocked and couldn't believe that I said it, but I said I had to say it, and I will say it, and it's the truth. So, I lost a lot when I was in prison, family members dying, everything, my children, I mean, it's just everything, my identity. And in the end, I learned this that was really important, that, we can take, in jail, they can take everything away from you. They can strip you away. They can beat you down, and they do. They can just basically just tear you apart. But one thing I learned that they could never do unless you allowed them, and you had to be freely willing, they could never take, your soul. And so I held on to that, and I learned some great lessons of discipline and what it truly like to be a man of integrity. Prison taught me that. And so I just basically gave this whole allocution was basically talking about those valuable lessons I learned, and that how it transformed me and how I wanted to go on to help others. And at the very end, and like I said, I said to the judge, and I said to Susan Harden, who was the assistant prosecuting attorney, that made me out to be this monster. That was the other thing that was really devastating that I wanted to say, that There's a man named Michael Jakes. I don't know if you're familiar with this case or not. I think it went pretty national about he drugged and raped and murdered his niece. It was a real tragedy here. He ended up getting on the death sentence federally and he ended up setting a deal for life. But anyway, he was a monster here for us. He had killed his own niece and physical evidence. I was compared to that man. And when I heard that day, it just crushed me. But I knew it wasn't true, but to be compared to, she was comparing me to monsters like that. And here I was, someone that there was no evidence, and you're making me out to be this. And so this is what I read in the end. And I said, no matter, we can endure suffering. Some of us can endure unfathomable amounts. And I definitely can relate to the unfathomable amount of suffering. We can either choose to look at each experience as necessary and contributing to our spiritual maturity. As a result, we learn that suffering to be one of the great mysteries of human condition, but that doesn't mean in any way we need to let it own us. And then I said this to the judge and to the attorney. And I said, in conclusion, I add our respect for myself and the truth. The whole reason I've stated the previous information is for the simple fact that if it were not for the decline in my health due to the progression of multiple sclerosis, pleas from family and friends to get out of jail, spend some quality time with them before it may be too late. I would stay in the wrongful confinement and fight the good fight for the exoneration I justly deserve. I would fight until my dying breath if need be, just as I swore I would at the very beginning of this travesty of justice. And I shocked a few of the people there because they were thinking,
wow.
And but it didn't matter if that doesn't even go through, John, because that had to be said. And I studied a lot, and so much corruption in the prosecution. I mean, they didn't even try to stop things that were said, even because they were hoping they would go through like the evidence of like the needles being mentioned. All that they weren't even going to say anything. And also other things that it just goes on and on. I mean, I could just tell you so many different instances of things that shouldn't have happened and were just kind of swept like no big deal, right to the end.
And Shane, I'd like to have you back on a little bit later down the road, but unfortunately for this, this will be a 2-part episode. But fortunately for now, we're out of time, and I do want to thank you for coming on the show.
Sure.
I think anybody who is familiar with your story and now has heard this, I think really has to, I don't think your innocence is in doubt. So I want to thank you for sharing that, and thank you for putting up the fight.
Absolutely, John. And like I said, I can send you another paper. I got stacks of letters from inmates that were persecuting sex offenders, writing letters to governors and the state's attorneys saying, let this man free. He's not what you think. And I mean, it's just all kinds of letters and petitions I wrote and signed. I mean, I never stopped fighting. And people out there that believed in me never stopped fighting too. So I'm grateful today, and I'd be more than happy to share, details of things that it would help legal. I do know a little bit about law, and I could share some of the points if it would help to of what to look for if you can, and also how corrupt it really can get.
Sure. Yeah, it definitely. That's something that I think this Felony Friday audience would find useful. Advice that you can give on, heaven forbid, and it does happen to people every day. If it's somebody who's listening or somebody that they know, a relative, a friend that is facing or could face in the future something similar to what you're going through, to what you went through, a false conviction, a false accusation, it's far more common than most people in this country really can imagine. So I want to thank you, Shane, one last time for coming on. And I'll be talking to you again. Is there any way, are you active on social media? If anyone listening wants to get a hold of you, is there a way to?
Absolutely. I have a Facebook page. If you look on it, I posted stuff like signing petitions for, the move.org or like signing petitions to save people. I mean, I'm trying to be active, working to help what I can do to help people that have been wrongfully convicted. And
can they find you on Facebook just by searching Shane Casey? Is that the best way?
Absolutely. And my page is public. I don't, it's open to everybody. So,
okay.
Absolutely, John. And, if anything I can ever do to help in any way, I'm more than happy to do it, because this is the most important. I know when I've learned this, there's power in numbers. And if we don't stick together and make our voice heard, then nothing will ever change. And even if we've been through hell as people have been wrongfully convicted of the worst crime on the planet Earth, we need to still be united and fight together, because change will never happen, especially in a system that moves so slow to make any little change happen.
Solid advice. Thank you, Shane, and have a great night.
You as well. Thank you, John.
Thank you for listening to today's show. I know it was a little bit longer, but I wanted to give Shane the opportunity to speak for himself. Now, I intentionally let Shane talk a lot. I didn't interrupt and ask a lot of questions because this was Shane's first time talking about this case, his first time speaking publicly about this case. And as you can tell from listening to the past 2 episodes, it was a very strange case. There were lots of unique twists and turns. And there are some areas that I do want to ask Shane more about. I do want to ask more about a couple different areas of each trial. There were 3 separate trials here, and we really could dig into each one. Hopefully, in the future, I can have Shane Casey back on, and we can cover those areas. Now, there is another case that I've covered extensively on this program that I think does have several elements in common with Shane's case, and dedicated listeners to this show, to Felony Friday, will know that I've closely followed the Jerry Sandusky scandal. I've dedicated 3 episodes to the Jerry Sandusky scandal by having John Ziegler come on the show to break down that case. Anyone who has spent any time looking into the facts of that Jerry Sandusky case knows that there's been a gigantic miscarriage of justice. You can find those episodes. I encourage any new listeners to this program to go back and listen. They were episode numbers 8, 14, and 31 of Felony Friday. And I will, you can find those at felonyfriday.com, where you can find the full archive for Felony Friday. And I will also link to each episode on the show notes page for this episode. That's lionsofliberty.com/FF52. Now, I do want to talk about a couple of those areas, some common areas of overlap, where I think there were some common themes in that Sandusky scandal, that Sandusky case, and the Shane Casey case. So both Shane and Jerry Sandusky, in the run-up to their cases, you remember that Shane talking during these interviews that he was very naive at the beginning. He readily admitted to that. He thought when he was approached by detectives that he was helping out. Immediately, as he said during the interview, that his thoughts went back to the young girl and her being harmed. The detectives lied about there being physical evidence of this girl being raped, when in fact there was none. So Shane, at the very start, he did not get a lawyer. He was very naive, thinking that he was helping, and thinking even once he found out that he was a subject of interest and they were pursuing him to charge him, he still didn't get a lawyer. He still thought that justice would prevail. And even when I asked him when he first realized he might be convicted of this crime, he never thought he was going to be convicted of the crime because he didn't commit the crime. So I think it's a very telling question. The way he answered that question really does tell me that Shane is innocent in my eyes. And if you listen back to my interview with John Ziegler asked Jerry Sandusky that same question when he asked Jerry Sandusky, when he interviewed him in prison, when he thought that he could be convicted of the horrible crimes alleged he committed. And he didn't really think he was going to be convicted until they, read that he was guilty of all the charges. So I think that's telling, the way that both Shane and Jerry Sandusky answered those questions. They were both very naive going into it, thinking the criminal justice system was actually seeking truth instead of seeking convictions. And I think that's very key. That's very key to both of those cases. Now, in Shane's case and in the Sandusky case, there was an incredible amount of manipulation, misleading by detectives, which we talked about with talking about there being physical evidence, and manipulation of even the judge, maybe some unintentional or maybe it was intentional manipulation in a couple different areas. In Shane's case, he talked about the tainted jury pool. I believe it was in the second trial where in the state of Vermont, this is kind of strange, I think. I didn't know that they did this in any states, where they'll have the same jury look at several trials, and they mixed up the questions or the details of Shane's trial with someone who had already been convicted of some horrible crimes against children. And the jury pool thought, when they saw Shane, they thought that Shane had committed those crimes, and then they were told later to discount that, to forget about that. But of course, once you have that image in your mind that's associated with someone, that's pretty hard to overcome. There's also the key evidence where they misled and manipulated. Really, the only piece of actual physical evidence that they had in Shane's case was that diary the girl's diary, with her shape book, or her Shane book, as they said, which really, there was really no link to Shane, but they made it seem that way, and they treated it as a key piece of evidence when in reality, it was just a child's diary. There's one more major aspect of this case where I did find some similarities between this Sandusky case, and that comes down to, in order to believe that these crimes took place, you have to believe in a massive conspiracy, right? In the Sandusky case, in order to believe that Jerry Sandusky sexually abused all these young boys, you have to believe that there are people helping him do this, people turning their back. And you also have to believe that there were six individuals at one of the most prestigious public universities in the nation who were covering up for a serial child molester and turned their back knowingly after hearing about a rape, a sexual abuse in a shower. You have to believe that six people, four at the university and two people outside of the university, one of them being the alleged witness's father, covered up, turned a blind eye to this, all in order to protect a football program. So they allowed an animal, allegedly, they allowed this animal, Jerry Sandusky, to go loose, abusing all these young boys, and turned a blind eye. These are, functioning people, university presidents, the most winning football coach of all time, the doctors, turned their back and just allowed this to go on. And in the Shane Casey case, it's just as crazy, right? In order to believe that Shane Casey was a part of this really child rape ring, you have to believe that there's some sort of AA, Alcoholics Anonymous, drugging and child raping ring that goes on, an international one, because this girl had said that there was the same thing happened in England when she was living there with her mother, and in the United States, that all these men would come back to their house after AA meetings, and they would watch the same movie, a pornographic movie, and they would drug her mother and her, and then rape her. And that happened, she said that happened in England, and the same exact thing, down to the details of the same movie being played, happened in the United States. So you have to believe in some massive Alcoholics Anonymous drug child rape ring, which that's too much for me to believe. And it's amazing that this was brought to trial based on a story so seemingly absurd. There's not a lot of shows out there that are going to question cases like this, that are going to look into horrible charges such as this. Most people will not do it because of the nature of the crimes. But as I've said many times before, we cannot allow emotion to blind us as we seek justice. Every single person deserves a fair trial, no matter how abhorrent the crimes they are charged with. And sexual abuse of a child is the most horrid crime that I can really think of. Anyone proven to have committed this crime, to have abusing a child, deserves to pay the full price of the law and deserves to rot in prison. But in order to do that, there has to be solid evidence. There has to be a strong case. We need to find a way to make our criminal justice system seek the truth and not just seek convictions, not just seek stacking convictions, no matter what the evidence and the truth say, which is what we have today. We have prosecutors that work with detectives just to stack convictions, the evidence be damned, and that has to stop. So I want to thank you guys for listening to this episode. I want to thank you for listening to my post-show rant here, and thank you for listening to this longer episode of Felony Friday. Just a couple quick notes. Please, if you have not yet, consider joining the Lions of Liberty Forum. It's growing pretty crazy. We're getting close to 1,000 members. It's on Facebook. You can join it by going to facebook.com in the search bar at the top. Type in Lions of Liberty Forum. It'll pop up and we will get you approved as long as your profile looks like you are a real person. And please, if you listen to the Lions of Liberty podcast on iTunes, please go to iTunes, give us a 5-star rating, leave us a review. If you don't listen on iTunes, please also consider subscribing wherever you listen, be it Stitcher Radio or any other number of podcasting apps. Please follow us on social media. If you aren't following us, please consider following us on Facebook, facebook.com/Lions of Liberty, Twitter, twitter.com/Lions of Liberty. That is it for today's show. Thank you guys for listening. This is John Odermatt signing off. Always remember to keep your head up and the fires of liberty burning.